especially so close to the election, how important it is for us to know about other people and hear about everyone's stories. To tell stories about grassroots organizing, I feel, is to tell stories about people finding their power, people becoming powerful, and people taking action in order to push a better, more free country. I'm a grassroots organizer. Now, I've tried to be a political consultant in DC, and successfully, I should say, although I was a successful consultant, but if being successful in DC means you have to do a lot of drinking, a lot of handshaking, and a lot of corruption, and I wasn't into that. I also would try to be a political director for different philanthropists, Harry Belafonte, Peter Lewis, George Soros. And I've even tried to teach organizing in different colleges, including Emerson. But for me, nothing beats getting into a neighborhood, rolling up your sleeves, and being in service of a community. Now, what does grassroots organizing actually mean? What it means is that you believe that power to change must start and end in the affected community. So it's not just about changing policies. It's definitely not advocating on someone's behalf, although that's important. But if you believe in grassroots, then you believe it is the young who should be having the conversation about the future. It is the elders who should be having conversations about Social Security or whatever we need to talk about now. And it's the women who should be talking about equal pay, right? The people affected should be a part of changing their own dynamic. And the reason why that's critical is if you don't recognize your own agency, if you don't recognize that you have the power to change, then the minute that something else needs changing, you will need an advocate. And what I believe is that grassroots organizing is one of the best examples of teaching someone not only how to fish, but how to build fish, how to keep the pond, and how to keep fish going for generations. So being an organizer, there's a couple of stories that I'd love to share about moments that changed my life and how I think about this. As I mentioned, I was lucky enough to work for Harry Belafonte. Some of the old heads out there might know him. For the young heads who don't know him, he's the dude who wrote Deo, Deo, Daylight Come. He wrote that one. You might know it as the Yankees song. I knew it as the song from Beetlejuice. It depends what generation you're in. But while I was working with him, he was someone who had brought Martin Luther King his home. He had paid for Martin Luther King's life insurance and supported the civil rights movement very completely as the first man to sell 1 million records, as a very famous celebrity. He came out not only with his body, but also with his money to support the civil rights movement. And so working with him, we were working with gangs, helping gangs get legitimate businesses. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that when you have a gang, you have a need. You have a need for community, you have a need for protection, and you have a need for an economy. That's why people join gangs. People don't join gangs to hang out. They join gangs to have a family. And so what we wanted to do was not dismantle the gang. Many of us could be seen as gangs if we decided to take on a different type of economy. So we wanted to keep that gang structure in place, but help them find legitimate businesses to work on. And the story I want to tell about that is about this young man named Kevin Sanchez, who was an MS-13 member, gang member, was figuring out how to better his community. ICE at that point was coming in, meaning immigration. They were doing raids in high schools. And so even though this kid was in a place where he needed protection, he needed to join a group to do that, there was also other things affecting his life. And we took him and a lot of kids to Appalachia. And those of you who have never been to Appalachia before, if you ever want to see what third world America looks like, you go right there. Just go to Kentucky, go to Pennsylvania, go to the Apple Shop, a great youth group in Kentucky, and you can see what America's third world nation looks like. And so we go there, and if there's anything about young men, is that fights happen twice, when they get together and when they leave. And so that first day, you really want to make it so that people can get to know each other in a way that might not elevate tension, and might not make people feel more vulnerable. And so as we were going through our day, one of the things that we had to do was pump water. And so we go to these young men and we say, hey, we have to go pump water. And Kevin was like, pump water? What does that mean, pump water? And we were like, we have to go pump water. And Mitch, the young man from Apple Shop Appalachia, is like, come on, Kevin, I'll show you. And so he's like, is that picking up girls? Like, he's trying to figure out what pump water could possibly mean. And they go off for a little bit and we're continuing to do our work. And all of a sudden he comes running back, holding his bottle of water, going, Miss Malia, water comes from the ground. And I looked at him and I was like, I know, right? It's kind of cool. And I was like, and that's very good water. And he took a sip of it and you could kind of see him thinking, right? And then he was like, wow, back in Virginia, like at least we have cable and running water. Like we might not have much, but we don't have to do this every time we want some water. And it was this huge wake-up call. And he was silent for a good part of that trip. And just very reflective, which is something that you always want to take note of when you're working with young people. And by the end of it, he was mad. And I could tell he was going to be one of the kids who was going to get into a fight before we got everyone on those buses and we sent them home. And so, anyone who does youth work, you talk about it, right? Keep an eye on Kevin. He seems a little upset. And eventually, there was a blow up. And when we got Kevin and we sat him down, and we said, what's up? And he said, you lied to us. And I wasn't sure really what he was talking about. And so I asked, well, what do you mean I lied to you? And he said, you tell us that if we can find ways to make our own money and if we work hard, we'll be fine. And then he looked at me and he pointed to the fields in Appalachia that we had just spent the weekend in, and he said, look how George Bush does his own people. Wow. Wow, right? Here we talk about solidarity, especially in our communities. We talk about racial solidarity. We talk about the solidarity of groups that keep us safe, like gangs. And so here was this kid seeing whiteness as a different sort of solidarity, right? That George Bush cares about these kids that are sitting in squalor in Appalachia. And it was a wonderful moment in a really surreal way, because it actually allowed us to get out of the conversation of you're in MS-13 because you're a Guatemalan from Fairfax, Virginia. But we were actually able to point to those kids who pump water every day and say, no, baby, those aren't George Bush's people. They're one of us. And that was an incredible grassroots organizing moment for me. So why do we do this work? Well, for stories like that, getting scabies in Appalachia is not one of the reasons why I do it. Although it's wonderful to be in service of communities that are willing to help themselves. And that's my next story that I want to talk about. I don't know how many people are familiar with Diane Nash, but Diane Nash is an amazing civil rights leader. She was one of the young women who founded SNCC. She founded SNCC she was 17 when she founded SNCC. She was almost 18 when she was arrested at her first lunch counter. And I want to say that she was like 16 when she started training. Definitely look her up. She's this beautiful former beauty pageant young woman. And I tell this story because to talk about grassroots organizing and to talk about finding your own power in order to make change. Diane Nash changed my life in 20 minutes sitting with this freedom fighter. So Diane Nash, famously, she's known for this scene standing in the Nashville courthouse or City Hall, and Mayor West comes out, and you guys know those scenes, right? There's like the black people here, and there's the white people here, and if you've seen the Freedom Rides movies or anything, you've seen this image. And Diane stood there with the rest of her crew, and they asked the mayor questions. not attacking questions, but just questions. Why, if we pay for food in Woolworths, can we not, or if we pay for things in Woolworths, can we not buy food in Woolworths, right? I'm trying to ask questions that will get the mayor to think, that would get the community to think, why are you discriminating against us? And Diane Nash decided to just ask that question. And she looked at Mayor West and she said, do you feel it wrong to discriminate against anyone based on their race? And at that moment, looking at this young 17-year-old woman who had just shut down his city for a while through protests, he was honest. And he said, yes, I do think it's wrong. And that was on the headline the next day. That was what SNCC was able to run with. And this young woman, by asking a very honest, very earnest question, was able to break the backbone, if you will, at least for Mayor West and the segregation in Nashville. So why am I telling that story? Because that's not really the main story. I'm getting to the main story. I'm like looking at Jillian, I'm like, what should I do? But I'm telling that story because that's a story of how easy it is done. Grassroots organizing is not hard, and if it's hard for you, you're doing it wrong. Finding freedom is really important. And it should be joyful. It should come with song. That's why the civil rights movement had so many beautiful songs, because their hearts were elated with the freedom they were finding, not only within themselves, but in their community and finally their country. So I tell a story about a young woman who is a part of our accelerator program. And if you want to know more about Epicenter Community or our accelerator program for creatives and businesses, I happen to have a little magazine article right on the front desk that you can grab. But this young woman was a young woman who wanted to start prenatal and parenting classes for Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. She wanted to not only help people plan to do family planning responsibly, but also women have healthy pregnancies, and then also have the support once they're done having children, once they have the baby. It's really when the work starts. And to have the support going through any post, what is it called? When you're sad after you have a kid?
Postpartum.
Thank you. I'm like, not post-menopause. I'm like, that's not the word. Tells you what age I'm entering. And she was this young woman from Romania, and very, very excited about opening this business. And so she came to our accelerator, and the second class she came in, maybe the third, she came in, and she was upset. And we got into circle and we asked her what was wrong. Well, she had just had a conversation with her husband, who didn't know what female CEOs were, who didn't understand why she was going to go off and become a CEO when she had a daughter at home that she could be a good parent to, rather than giving parenting classes to someone else. And we all know that gender bias, right? We heard of it before if it hasn't actually happened to us. And she didn't know what to do. I mean, this was her dream, right? This is what she wanted to do. And what was so beautiful, now this is a business accelerator that we have these conversations, because in order for people to find their agency, they have to have the self-confidence, right? They have to have work. They have to have a whole lot of therapy sometimes. And sometimes that's a lot to pay for, so we try to do it in community, the healing part of the work. And a couple of married women went up to her and started talking to her about how they have these conversations with their husbands, or what might happen. Another gentleman stood up, gave some suggestions. And a couple weeks later, Monica came into class saying that, her husband seems to be coming around. By the time graduation happened, her husband was in the audience, in the first row, I'll say, with the daughter and a camera, taking pictures, standing up, applauding her, and being amazingly, amazingly supportive. She graduated, did the pitch contest. She didn't win, but she started her parenting classes in the bowling building in Roxbury this winter. And guess who's doing childcare? Her husband. That's grassroots organizing. Thank you very much.